the healthcare programs are a significant concern. In fact, one of the interesting things is that if we had a healthcare system that was as efficient as some of the European healthcare systems, we would have no deficit. So that, in fact, it's the inefficiency of our healthcare system that is a major cause of our deficits. So, in my mind, our focus should
make it more efficient.
Is to make our healthcare system more efficient.
And did the healthcare reform that was passed by the Congress do that?
It was a move in the right direction.
But didn't go far enough?
But it didn't go far enough. And some of the things are going to take a while. Look, there was a lot of pushback from the pharmaceutical industry.
大家好，今天给大家带来的是诺贝尔得奖获得者约瑟夫·斯蒂格里茨的一个演讲视频。在这个视频当中约瑟夫·斯蒂格里茨主要谈到了美国目前的经济问题，比如美国如何通过投资和消费实现经济增长的平衡，以及联邦政府的预算结构，也就是马斯克之前正在干的，要把政府的一个支出降下来。让我们一起来看一下约瑟夫·斯蒂格里茨他有什么样的意见和想法。
Did the Occupy Wall Street movement 1 year later have a success? Did it accomplish something?
It did accomplish something. It accomplished an increased awareness in the United States, I think, that we have this divide.
And with that recognition of this disparity in income inequality, do you think there will be political action coming out of that?
I think it's shaped some aspects of the political campaign going on right now. I think the sensitivity to the issues of inequality, Mitt Romney's remark about 47%.
What did you read into that?
I read into a lot.
47% of the people are dependent on the government and would never vote for him, he said.
What I read is, he didn't understand what was really the economics, what was going on. Because 47%, he said, didn't pay income taxes. But many of those people pay payroll taxes. Many of those are young people, old people. After all, many of the older people may not be paying income taxes now, but they paid their Social Security contributions, and now they're getting back what they paid for. So to say that they were freeloaders was really denigrating a lifetime of work that they had contributed to.
Where was the Federal Reserve in all this?
The Federal Reserve obviously wasn't doing what it should have done in the years before the crisis.
It was paying too much attention to interest rates and not enough attention to employment.
That was one of the problems. It was not paying enough attention to what the banks were doing. One of the members of the Fed actually talked about there's a housing bubble going on. There's predatory lending going on. You should stop this, because if you don't, you're going to have a problem. Greenspan and the rest of the board ignored it. And so that led to the housing bubble and predatory lending. The Fed has a responsibility also for stopping abusive credit card practices. Didn't do anything about it. They could have curtailed it. There are a lot that they could have done to curtail the excessive risk-taking of the banks.
Well, but you know Ben Bernanke. Did he simply have a different view of the economy than you have and Paul Krugman?
I think part of the problem is that when you get into those jobs, there is a problem of cognitive capture, as we call it.
What is cognitive capture?
Cognitive capture is that
it's a mindset that goes with the office.
Exactly. There's an old expression where you sit determines where you stand.
Yes.
And one of the problems is if you spend all day talking to bankers and those in the financial community, you are at risk to start thinking like them. Now, that doesn't happen to all of them, but it's certainly a risk. I think he believed too much that financial markets would take care of themselves. In fact, he was very explicit after.
Well, that's what they said about Alan Greenspan.
Yes, and Bernanke was not as bad in that way as Greenspan. He makes statements that are very similar. After the bubble broke, people asked him, are you worried? He said, oh, no, financial markets will contain the risk. So they really believed that financial markets worked the way they did in those textbook models with perfect information, models that I had criticized in the work that led to my Nobel Prize. He said, this is not real economies. Real economies are marked by imperfections of information asymmetries. And unfortunately, too many people in the financial markets didn't learn those basic economics of understanding how markets don't always work as well as they do in those simplistic textbook models.
Are we looking at a new normal, as some people like to say? So that it will be a while, if ever, that we get back to the levels of unemployment and the level of 5 or 6% and the level of GDP growth that we had assumed at an earlier time.
I don't like that vocabulary because it is a vocabulary that says...
The new normal vocabulary?
Yeah, I don't like the new normal vocabulary because it's a vocabulary that says we should just accept this. I don't believe it's inevitable. I think there is a risk that we will go in that direction if we don't address the economy's fundamental problems.
How much of the federal budget goes to entitlements? How much of it goes to interest, payment on interest, how much goes to defense, and how much goes to entitlements? So that discretionary spending is a smaller amount than...
Discretionary spending is a relatively small part of it. The word entitlements is a little bit a word that is used in a pejorative way, because remember, when people...
But you know what I mean, so choose the word that you find better.
Well, what I mean is these expenditures... Healthcare, Social Security...
Things that people have paid for?
They paid for that, right, exactly.
Okay. Tell me how they should be reformed. Tell me how much of a contribution. Most people who look at the deficit, including Bowles-Simpson, said we have to have a significant reduction and a new way of looking at those things, which have been part of the assumption of people.
That's right. Now, it turns out that Social Security is not a big problem.
Yeah. Change their age?
Change the age a little bit, change the contribution a little bit. We can put that on.
Right.
So that's something I think we can solve fairly easily and should not be at the core of the debate. The healthcare programs are a significant concern. In fact, one of the interesting things is that if we had a healthcare system that was as efficient as some of the European healthcare systems, we would have no deficit. So that, in fact, it's the inefficiency of our healthcare system that is a major cause of our deficits. So, in my mind, our focus should
make it more efficient.
Is to make our healthcare system more efficient.
And did the healthcare reform that was passed by the Congress do that?
It was a move in the right direction.
But didn't go far enough?
But it didn't go far enough. And some of the things are going to take a while. Look, there was a lot of pushback from the pharmaceutical industry. One of the things is that in the bill that was passed that provided for the drug benefit, there was a provision that gave the drug companies huge amounts of money. That was cut back just a little bit. Health insurance companies still get excess profits. So we have a lot of fat in this part of the healthcare system that we could take out. The problem is that the kinds of proposals that, say, Ryan put forward, the voucher system, basically does nothing for the healthcare system as a whole, limits what you give to the elderly, and if the healthcare costs keep going up and you limit the elderly, you're going to effectively deprive the elderly of healthcare. There's no two ways about it.
If we had had a grand bargain that the president and John Boehner were working on and came close to having, and we may have to look at that issue again after the election, would that have been the right medicine at the time? Not only to raise the debt ceiling, but to get the economic recovery in a better place?
They were focusing, I think, on deficit reduction without an awareness I think, of how weak the economy was. And that was the same problem with Bo Simpson. If you look at Bo Simpson, it was predicated on a fairly quick recovery of the economy. Paid no attention to the turmoil going on in Europe, the slowdown in Asia. And if their prediction of an global...
those two things are connected.
Yeah, exactly.
The less demand in Europe is affecting the slowdown in China.
And we are in a globalized world where those two slowdowns affect us. So if they had been right that global growth was strong and the American economy was going to recover strongly, then that would have been a time to try to put our fiscal house in order. To bring our...
You think the majority of economists are on the side of Stiglitz and Krugman and others, or on the side of people like Glenn Hubbard and others? Where are the majority of economists?
I think the majority of economists, are on the side that you need a fiscal stimulus at the current time. That monetary... policy, QE2, QE3 is not going to work, and the only way to get recovery is through some form of fiscal stimulus. I think the majority of economists...
But like the fiscal stimulus we had before, or like what the Fed is trying to do with QE3?
No, I think the majority of economists do not think that QE3 is going to have much of an effect.
So what kind of stimulus do you think is necessary for the American economic recovery?
I think you need a stimulus like the fiscal stimulus that we had before, but better designed.
To have the kind of corporate investment that you think...
Exactly. Not across the board tax cuts, especially tax cuts for,
Was that what was wrong with the stimulus in the first place, all the tax cuts that were part of it?
That was one of the things that was wrong. A second thing that I would have done would have been to use more money to help the states that were in the process of cutting back because their revenues were going down. They have balanced budget frameworks where when the revenues go down, they have to cut back spending, and that means teachers were being laid off, and that was leading to more unemployment. Total public sector employment today is about 600,000 lower than it was at the beginning of the crisis, and mostly at the local, state, and local level. Whereas if we had normal growth, with the growth in our labor force, our population, we would have added almost 1.2 million workers to the public sector. So the public sector has been part of the problem, the weakness, the contractionary policies. So that would have been part of my stimulus. And my view is, if young people can't get a job, let's try to train them and educate them to be more productive in the future. Not cut back on our universities.
And you can only do that with an investment in education.
Exactly.
Okay, but let me come to finally, the fiscal cliff. Are we going to go over this fiscal cliff? And if we do, what does that mean?
Well,
because you got all these things coming around the corner.
We know, as an economist, if we go over the fiscal cliff, it means the likelihood that we go into recession becomes very significant. At the very least, our anemic growth, which is too slow to create the jobs for the new entrants in the labor force, already will become much slower.
So can we avoid the fiscal cliff without compromise?
Somebody is going to have to change their position. That's clear.
Okay, but don't you have to accept the fact that we're going to have a compromise? We are going to have some kind of grand bargain in order to avoid the fiscal cliff. And therefore, what would you be prepared to recommend in order to achieve that objective?
Yeah. To me, a compromise that would be based on stimulating the economy now based on investments that increase the country's balance sheet. So we borrow, but on investments that make our economy stronger, and a commitment when the economy is recovered that we will, in fact, actually run a surplus. Go back to where we were in 2000.
We can begun to deal with the debt.
That's right. So it's not just balanced budget that I want to go to. I would, the compromise, I go say, we'll go back to a surplus. Because over the cycle, We want to have a balance.
What kind of rate of GDP to debt can we live with?
One way of thinking about this is that if we have a debt GDP ratio of 100%, which most people think is very high.
Yes, they do.
But there is confidence in the country, and we're in a normal situation where real interest rates are what they've been over the historical period, which is about 1%. That means we're spending about 1% of our GDP on servicing the debt. That's not a lot.
But
so we can manage that, and we can certainly manage that if we spend that money on investments. The question is not so much shouldn't be just focusing on the deficit, but it's what we've done with the money.
Go ahead.
So if we spend the money on investments, then our balance sheet is stronger. You wouldn't go up to a company and say, you have a big debt. What does that mean, a big debt? It depends on what I owe is one side.
If you can't pay your debt at one point, then you're going to go out of business, is what it means.
But if you have assets, that's what you want to look at. So it's the assets relative to the debt.
And the balance is what makes the difference.
It's the balance.
But the other argument often made about the U.S. economy and the performance of the United States economy is that we have been borrowing lots of money from China and other countries in order to make products to feed our own consumption, because we were a consuming society rather than saving society, and to sell the products back to them. So we borrow the money to make the things so we could sell to them. And that cycle has to stop.
I think that's right. I think we have to move more into a investment-based economy.
And that's what got us in the trouble. We were too much of a consumption society, and we were too indulgent.
That's right. And that's where the bubble encouraged us to consume more. And that's where I get disturbed when we pass these tax cuts that were designed to encourage consumption, not to encourage investment. And every once in a while you hear from somebody in the administration, they say, the consumer is coming back. And that worries me. Because we were already
consumers, but here's where you lose me. I mean, not lose me. Your whole argument is based on growth and demand, fueling employment. So consumption creates demand, which creates growth, which creates jobs.
But
what am I missing?
That the consumption has to be sustainable. And that means that you have to save and invest.
Okay.
And so in the long run, as your income goes up, you can have a higher level of consumption. And right now, we need to stimulate our economy. Stimulating our economy will lead firms to invest more if we design a tax code that encourages investment and not speculation, not doing the other things.
Thank you. The Price of Inequality, Joseph E. Stiglitz, winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics, subtitle, How Today's Divided Society Endangers Our Future. Thank you. We'll be back. Stay with us.
好了，我们针对视频找几个要点一起聊一下。这里第一点提到了华尔街运动对美国经济与政治影响的讨论。华尔街运动1年后的影响，指出它增加了美国公众对收入不平等的关注，并影响了政治竞选的议题。此外也批评了联邦储备在危机前对经济、就业和银行业监管的不足，以及其对金融市场的错误认知，导致未能有效预防住房泡沫和滥用信用。然后这里谈到了联邦预算结构。联邦预算中的主要开支，特别是社会保障、医疗保险等福利项目所占的比例，以及如何通过改革这些项目来解决经济中的根本问题。提到要提高医疗保健系统的效率，以减少赤字，并指出当前的经济恢复需要财政刺激，而非立即的财政整顿。全球经济增长的放缓对美国经济的影响， 最后提到了如何通过投资和消费平衡刺激经济增长。为实现经济恢复和增强的目标，应当基于投资来刺激经济，特别是投资于能够增强国家经济实力的项目。这里的关键不在于单纯的赤字关注，而在于资金的用途，强调投资而非消费的重要性。提到美国经济需要从消费型社会转向更多投资，以实现可持续的经济增长和就业创造。目前特朗普政府也一直在强调这个投资的重要性，包括增加关税包括把之前很多美国企业在国外的生产搬到美国国内，包括之前台积电在美国设厂，这些都是目前关税政策带来的一个影响，就是让制造业回流美国。回流美国的同时可以增加美国本土人民的就业。这是特朗普政府一直在做的一件事情。好了，本期视频就到这里，感谢大家收看。